Hello and welcome to week 3 of this captain's run. I am here with the Leopards team. We have their captain, Pumelelo Mbangwa, and he will be giving his team a little bit of an introduction and a G-up to try and get them really psyched up for this captain's run. And we have Gavin Ford, our conservation expert, who's with us this afternoon. So, Pumi, I'm going to hand over to you. Just to say a few words, please.
Yeah, look, Cyrus, I don't know what you're talking about, G'd up. We're always G'd up. Every day is a G'd up day for us, you know, and especially considering that we can listen to Gavin Ford, who's been sending us heaps of what you call them, WhatsApp messages to keep us informed and all of that. We're on it. As far as conservation is concerned, and as far as getting involved in these conservation games, I tell you what, it's been an absolute eye-opener, and I speak for everybody in the Leopard team, because all the stuff that keeps getting sent to us by, I'll call them our captains, each guy that comes in as a conservationist to give us information, there's something new you learn absolutely every time. And you might think that you know what's going on and you know what you need to look after and what's harming the world, what's harming the animals. I've learned we know absolutely nothing. So it's been great to actually get involved. With me today is Tony Watson as well as Brendan Ashby. Guys, welcome. I know that you'll have a lot to say and, you know, to chip in and also show off how you've swatted before we listen to Gav. And Cyrus will be jealous, I'm sure.
I'm always jealous. I'm gonna ask Tony and Brendan to just say how's it at this point.
Cyrus, good afternoon. I must say, Pom, if you wouldn't mind working on your team talk a little bit, that was, you know what, I think you could have done better.
Do you agree, Brendan?
Did he leave? I think that was pretty motivational. Like he said, the team is incredibly motivated to win this thing, so say no more.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, over to you, Gavin. Please take it away.
All right, super. Thank you, gentlemen. Well, it's a nice afternoon to be chatting to you guys, and Puma, thank you for that introduction there. I'm sorry that the rest of your team are missing out this afternoon, because I was looking forward to, you know, berating some of you for, you know, the points. Leopards lost points the other day, and I mean, I can't believe this stuff, you know. Ingui, I mean, you know, it's a special animal, man. Anyway. So this afternoon, I'm going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on conservation in Africa. It's a sobering discussion, regrettably. Sobering in that it's probably one of the most profound happenings in our lifetimes so far. And I'm probably older than all of you. The biggest impact has been the restriction of travel, international travel. So when the whole COVID thing blew up, and I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of that whole thing, because there's a lot of different points of view on it. But the impact on conservation has been profound. And as I said, international travel has been the ultimate issue here. Tourism has been facilitated by travel worldwide forever. That's how it works. And most, if not all, conservation initiatives need funding. And the funding comes mainly from tourism. True, there's big corporations that donate huge amounts of money to various causes around the world. And in Africa, there's a number of NGOs, international NGOs, that work very, very hard in producing fundraising to fund various projects. Probably one of the biggest ones is Frankfurt Zoological Society, which is obviously based in Germany. And they have since the 50s, in fact, funded a lot of projects primarily in Tanzania. But coming further south, Kenya also has had major funding. And then closer to home, we South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe in more recent years has developed a profile where we've got more and more NGOs and local NGOs focusing on issues that need addressing. So when you think about it, I've been trying to get some stats on this. America is probably the largest source of tourism for Africa, closely followed by Europe. And I'm just going to lump all those countries together, France, Germany, whatever, put them all together. So the estimations of loss are, and I'll just read them to you quickly, $76.69 billion. That's a lot of money. Worldwide, I'm told it's about $810 billion. That's the loss in business travel earnings. Tourism can be a percentage of that, but the scale is why I've included the business side, because the scale gives you an idea of the magnitude of the loss. 22 million jobs have been lost through loss of tourism. That's an awful lot of people and families without an income. It's quite frightening. So COVID-19, in a nutshell, has been the root cause of one of the biggest catastrophes that we know of to date for conservation. So what does that mean? Conservation can be on a macro scale. It can be the continent, okay, but nobody's big enough to encompass that. But in our mind's eye, we can look at the continent as a whole. We can look at different countries. Now, for this initiative, the Zambezia initiative, we've got all the countries that are essentially the headwaters of the rivers that supply the Zambezi River. So they're neighbors, and the governments in all of these countries, and I'll say our countries because we're all working together here, you know, the priorities vary, but conservation, and this is a fact of life, it doesn't matter what country you're in, but conservation issues are not a priority. They are essentially the priority of NGOs. Now, government may have different relationships with these different NGOs. That's typical, that's normal worldwide. And the NGOs normally are focused on specific zones or animals of interest. Now, I'm not one to promote saving a particular species because that is very, very short-sighted. So you've got to look at the environment. You've got to look at the habitat or the region within which a species might occur. It still needs funding. You still need surveillance teams. You still need boots on the ground. You still need collaborative meetings between NGO groups and governments and communities to make all these initiatives function. Again, it has to be paid for. So the loss of the money, and you know, one of the ways we raise money, and I say we because I'm a tour operator, I'm a shareholder in a small inbound business. So a percentage of what we earn, we put towards various conservation initiatives. That's not a unique feature. Nearly every operator I know has a similar structure. So a lot of them, say 3% or 4% of what is taken in per bed night is donated towards a cause. So now when you consider the losses of jobs, which in fact, are an indicator of the numbers of operations that have closed down temporarily or been put on ice. If you extrapolate that in your minds, you think of the income earned. So it's difficult to give you an average income, so because of the disparity between different safari operations. But safari operations will vary between $200 a day to 2,800 US dollars a day. And I'm talking per person per day. See the disparity. So a percentage of each one of those bed nights goes towards some conservation initiative somewhere. That's a lot of money. That was cut off almost overnight, lost. Some operators have been able to keep their safari camps open and they will keep them open for as long as they can. And others, it's going to be much shorter. So they've lost staff. They've had to put camps on ice. And what that means in the long term is that a lot of those areas now no longer have any form of protection or surveillance. The poaching that we are seeing nowadays, we can describe in two different forms. One is becoming more and more subsistence orientated. In other words, somebody trying to feed their family, whether it's directly taking an impala or a warthog or whatever to feed a family, or taking animals on a larger scale or specific high earning species like the rhino, like the pangolin, like lions, for commercial reasons. What we're seeing is that areas now are becoming more and more vulnerable to incursions by guys who, out of necessity on one side or out of commercial gain on the other side, are penetrating these areas and having a negative impact on species. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole rhino thing. I think we're all familiar with that. But the rhino situation is going to become more and more critical. Pangolins, you know, up until possibly 2 years ago, hardly anybody had heard of a pangolin. But it's suddenly sprung into the limelight, and it's now said to be one of the most trafficked animals in Africa. Very hard to actually comprehend that, when most of us who've spent our entire lives wandering around the bushes have probably seen a dozen at the very most. So when we hear of 8, recently there was a haul in Hong Kong of 3.5 to 4 tons of pangolin scales that were intercepted by the Hong Kong police. You must know how many thousand of these animals have been slaughtered for that. A lot of them coming from Central Africa, but of course the scourge doesn't end there, it comes all the way down. So in Central Africa, we have amazing arboreal pangolins, black-bellied pangolins, white-bellies, and a few others, all the way down to our little one that we get trotting around the woodlands here. Sad but true. So poaching per se has a negative effect. So let's discard the subsistence poaching just for now. Look at the commercial side, because the incentive, I believe, is much greater there. And the backup is much, much greater as well. There's an awful lot of money to be gained by poaching certain animals. The return is massive. For rhino horn, in fact, I've been told recently that the price of rhino horn, which at one time was worth more than gold gram for gram. That's difficult to understand. But the price of rhino horn has declined. The return per kilogram of pangolin scales, rhino horn, ivory from elephant, or lion bones is such that major players involving higher politicians, higher police bodies and other surveillance organizations are involved, either in a protective manner or covertly assisting. So it all boils back to the lack of money, and that's essentially what we are seeing now as a result of COVID. As soon as the travel restrictions are lifted, people will travel again, and that money flow will start. Now, the people will say, well, even if the travel restrictions are lifted, how do we know people will travel? People will travel. You know, those with money and those who just want to get out and who really don't give a rat's ass about this disease that's around, because there's so many protective mechanisms in place now, they are going to travel. And I believe it'll start very slowly, because people are cautious naturally, but the incentive to travel has never been lost. It's still there. It's just been restricted. So I think once the doors have opened and everyone said, okay, now you can do it, I think it'll come back in quite a significant way. And obviously with that will come an increase in money and employment, and it won't be as rosy as it was by any means. I think it'll take a long time to get back there, and life will be different. Life will be different after this. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel, because human nature, fortunately, is one of protective and caring for the most part. Okay, obviously there's individuals who are not that way inclined, but for the most part, we are designed to care and nurture for something, whatever it is, whether it's your little dog or your cat, or things on a bigger scale. Anyway, so look, it is dramatic. It doesn't sound right. It is dramatic. It is very, very serious. It's hugely disturbing when you think of the fact that almost overnight people lost their livelihoods. They lost their homes. They lost the means to feed their families. I've never been in a position where I've had to resort to other means to provide for my family. It's been pretty close as a young guide. You know, we had to survive on tips here and there. But I can't imagine what it must be like for some people who've lost everything. I mean, you see people standing on the streets nowadays with nothing, just the clothes they're standing in. It's desperate. It really is, and quite disturbing. Now, from a conservation point of view, conservation money is surplus money, money that is surplus to what people have needed right then, and that's why they're able to provide. Losing that, we lose everything. That's how serious it is. So, all is not lost. What can you guys do as sportsmen and men of means, of great character, of significant achievement? You know what? You can provide incentives for local movements. You know what? If you guys were having a dinner here in town somewhere, and the tickets were, you know, 500 Rand or something like that to have dinner with you, and then, you know, half of that was going to go to a local NGO saving something, or towards a wildlife sanctuary or a protection unit, I would do it. And I know there would be a lot of people out there who would do the same thing. So on a macro scale, things are not great, but you can have an effect on a local scale. You can have a very positive effect in putting money in. I'm afraid it all boils down to the shillings.
But there is something that I wanted to ask you, Gavin, and that really primarily boils down to how optimistic are you about the prospects of recovery in, say, the tourism industry once the restrictions are loosened?
Cyrus, I can tell you that my office has been busy since the shutdown. We all work remotely. Now we are a tiny operation. There are many out there much bigger, on bigger scales. Even though people are not traveling, or not, they wanted to, but obviously cannot travel this year, next year we are jam-packed. This year I was due to be on the road 160 days with guests, okay? And I take safaris all over. I do 13 different countries in Africa. And we are hoping that the travel trade will kick back in September at the very best, October, November, certainly November, December. We reckon there'll be people trickling in, hopefully, unless something major happens and it's all shut down. But next year, we are literally chock-a-block. And we are just one tiny operator. And the difficulties we're having at the moment to place people in the right camps are significant. And our team has been working since shutdown to move people into next year. So I'm confident that if things can be held, if the finger can be kept in the dike, in the hole in the dike, this year, next year, I think we're going to see quite a rapid turnaround. Well, by Christmas, I think it'll start.
Yeah, it's a dire picture that you paint, and I guess a real picture that you paint. But as you say we can help by being incentives for local movements, to quote you. In this time where there is a lockdown, effectively, nobody's going anywhere.
Yeah.
What is the key now? And I'm thinking particularly about the people who work in the industry that no longer exist. So yeah. How to help them? And I think it was, I can't remember who it was, who said there's a necessity to make sure that, we value the people who are in and around nature and around animals and habitat, sure, in order that they value it as well. So how do we help? Is there a way really that we can help that guy who's now standing on the street with just the clothes on his back?
You know what? If we're going to talk the concept, every conservation area has communities living around it. Providing for communities and for their future, and that's part of what Robin's operation does, is the key for a long-term survival of the communities and of those wildlife areas. So how do we do that? The only way I can think of right now within the constraints of movement is that you link up with operators or operations, and again, I'm using Robin's operation now, because they've put in place network connections with communities and community NGOs who are going to keep those communities intact as far as possible and provide for them. It's a terrible thing, but you've got to start somewhere. We can't feed everybody, unfortunately, but you've got to prioritize, I suppose, in your mind and say, okay, this month I'm going to put $100 towards the community in this area, or I'm going to give it to Zambezia and say, look, I want this to go to an NGO supporting school kids in a certain area. And, you know, apart from going around and feeding as many people on the street, which some of us have been doing, that's the only other way that we can start providing for safeguarding the future. And the communities are really, really important. Without community support, we lose the wildlife areas far more quickly.
I personally believe this is a big window for conservationists with regard to the families that are around the areas and habitats that they protect and have for business. Because it seems a time of sowing, and I know resources scarce, and every single person is struggling with regard to what they can get or how much they have, as it keeps diminishing if they're lucky to have, with some having none.
Yeah.
But in speaking to your concept, I think it's necessary for those who have those communities around to ensure that, one, they are seen, and two, they are practical in literally just feeding mouths and expressing who they are in that area. So we are of the Zambezia region. We are into conservation. We want our habitat to survive, and we can only protect our habitat and the animals that also inhabit it by working together. Without saying this, you don't have food right now, here's food. The time will come when you're okay, and can you help us, you know, because this fight is not for just us. You can do a whole lot as well at this time when things are particularly difficult for them. So as we look at the horizon, I think the now is so important in trying to build up these relationships with people who are vulnerable now, but who could do so much in a time to come.
Yeah, Puma, I really like the way you've expressed that. The time to sow is now. You're absolutely on the button. And I think that'll resonate with a lot of people as well.
Look, I mean, as looking at it from the outside, and I suppose living on the other side of the world in Europe, it's really, it's interesting to see. So from one standpoint, I mean, you know, the economic situation in Zim is not great. And when you look at, you know, the GDP of tourism from 2008 to where we are now, I mean, it's dropped from nearly 20% to less than 7%, you know, and so there's a hell of a lot of work that needs to be done. And obviously there needs to be more awareness in this part of the world about, you know, how much, because I think inherently the millennial generation that are coming through, these guys are, you know, they're working in tech jobs, they're making good money, but they idealize the perfect holiday or vacation to sunny, you know, sunny places in the world, and you know, ski trips and this sort of thing, and the actual concept of going on a safari to Africa is it just isn't there. And you know, when I talk to friends of mine that are here, they can't get their head around actually going there. So that's one part of it. But the other side then is government intervention and the realization that, you know, funding has to come from that side. And you know, that'll take steps as you know, hopefully the economy starts to improve, and you know, there's a movement to direct foreign direct investments. A percentage of funding from where I sit needs to be allocated to that, because it is a big part of GDP and always will be.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to say here, it's about 6% of the GDP.
Yeah, that's 6.8. So look, you know, I think my point is twofold there. I completely agree with what Pom is saying in terms of, you know, investment needs to go to those people in the periphery, and that makes a hell of a lot of sense in terms of you know, making sure that they are involved. But the funding from that, like you quite rightly said, comes from the NGOs, and the NGOs are funded by, you know, people that need to be involved, and if they don't care, quite frankly, their funding is going to cancer research.
Yeah.
And other things that they find to be more important. And look, I mean, I'm running a small GoFundMe campaign here to try and get a little bit of traction, a little bit of funding, and quite an eye-opening experience for me. Guys are going, what the hell would I give you money for that for? And these are like some of my best friends.
Yeah.
It's quite eye-opening because they don't understand how much and how under pressure the whole conservation thing is in Zim and that area.
It's one of those sort of fuzzy concepts for many people, that they think that, well, it's the big savannas and the elephants and the giraffe and all that sort of stuff wander around, and there's no need to protect it. It lives in paradise.
Yeah.
But I think even with in fact, unfortunately, the other documentaries that we see don't portray the sort of ugly side of conservation, which is the poaching, the rangers being murdered, having their families murdered, the contacts that the guys have on the ground with poachers, the really, really sinister behind the scenes stuff that's going on, where people are being corrupted and threatened, etc., unless they collaborate. People don't see any of that side of it. They just see the fuzzy, the nice, warm, fuzzy side, which is, oh, wow, Discovery Planet, whatever, baby elephants, all that sort of thing. But the harsh reality is all that needs to be protected. And that, well, it's not just the animal, it's the habitats, the ecosystems, to bandy a word, that's often used.
If I was to give any advice, Gavin, my simple theory would be every person, and you touched on it, that you rely on your American visitors, majority American visitors. I know what those people are like. They are enthusiastic. They arrive at your front door with a smile and a happy face. They are very, very enthusiastic people. Every single one of them that leaves their experience in Africa and returns home should be a traveling salesman for what they experienced in Africa. Now, often you will bring a group of people out and you will take them on the most fantastic safari, for which I'm envious. But the opportunity to take them into those villages that sit adjacent to conservation areas and let them see how those people are living, and the effect or the difference that they could make on the peripheral people, as Pommy said just now. They are part of your problem, and they can also be part of your solution. I know this week that China admitted that the pangolin is the greatest traded animal on the planet, not just in Africa, on the planet. They this week removed it from the list of animals that they deem to have medicine and medical powers. They removed it from the list. You and I both know that that probably won't solve anything for another 10 or 15 years. If I were hungry, living in my little dwelling, 5 or 6 of us inside our little dwellings. I grew up on a dairy farm. I used to sit with my best mates in those huts around the little fire that sits in the middle of the room. I can still see it as clear as day. And you're hungry. What would you do?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I watched I don't know if the rest of you saw the little clip that came with the little rhino and they were giving it the bottle. Kind of brings tears to your eyes. But as Brendan said, you can shout at the top of your voice here in the UK, here in Europe. People have got bigger problems. They kind of think, well, Africa will take care of itself. I think you need to enhance the people that have come and touched Africa and leave Africa with an experience that they want to shout their mouths about. You take back the good old raffle system, those people that have visited you, and ask them, here's a book. We want you to sell 10 raffle tickets for the trip of a lifetime to your friends in your community at $100 each. if you could get 1,000 of your visitors to sell their book, or what's that? I don't know, $1 million? I don't know what the solution is, but I think that your traveling salesmen, your people that come and spend time with you and the other operators, go home with a project that you instill in them. My view.
Well, we have a part of what we do is we have several projects that we have involved with the local communities in different areas that we operate. In fact, one of them is up at the falls, which Gavin may know about. And that means that people go and they'll spend 2 or 3 days in one of the villages north of the falls, installing various things that go on from water filtration systems or biogas or whatever. So nearly every trip that goes out, there is a philanthropic part of that trip.
Brilliant.
And that is often the highlight of their entire safari.
And what have you seen as the return on those philanthropic experiences? Have you seen a financial return on those?
No, not at all. But it's word of mouth. So it's not a direct cash return by any means, but it's a word of mouth experience, which people want that experience. So it's an experiential experience, which is actually in many ways far more effective, because more and more people want to do that. They want to feel that they're giving back.
Yes.
So we think that's very effective.
Very good.
Yeah, I love
Very
that.
good.
And I think that's one of the critical things here. So we've run out of time. If you can believe it, it's been fantastic Captain's Run. So as we have done with a few of the others in the past, I'm going to ask you all to please unmute all of your microphones at the moment. And that will be because we'd like to pay a little bit of homage and to give thanks to all of you who've been on here, to Gavin for really being such an incredible coach for us. And then also just for all of the people working on the front line of the conservation efforts, just to give them a round of applause, please. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite things. So thank you all so much for being on the call and for being on this Captain's Run. So this particular portion will come to an end. We will be giving points, and something tells me you guys might have scored fairly highly. But we're not going to give anything away just yet. So thank you all for being on the call.
Our wildlife needs help. Tourism to Africa is at an all-time low. You can assist by liking and sharing the conservation games. You can contribute financially by hitting the donate button on the Zambezia.com website. Let's get together and back up the frontline conservation team.